let's talk politics for a few minutes. I know you're not supposed to talk politics or religion, but we're doing both here, so we might as well get into it. You know, the word politics is from a Greek word, and there were two Greek words that were stuck together. Poly, meaning people, and ticks, meaning bloodsuckers. And so politics is the art of sucking the blood from the people. Now, I'll just tell you up front that I'm a fiscally conservative individual. One of my top 10 favorite Bible verses was penned by the wisest man who ever lived, King Solomon, and it says, "The heart of the wise inclines to the right, but the heart of the fool to the left." Don't you think that would make a great graphic for O'Reilly or Hannity? It reminds me of the couple who constantly fought. She was very conservative, he was very liberal. They fought all the time. They were invited one evening to a costume party, and so the wife rented one of those two-piece horse costumes. And she told her husband, "I've rented a two-piece horse costume. I'm going to be the head. You just be yourself." No booze now. Well, listen. The reality of all of this is I have never been more concerned about our nation. Our nation is currently going through massive change. Our Democratic Congress has spent $2 trillion since Obama took office. And you may have caught the news yesterday morning about $110 million of the stimulus that went to Los Angeles County to create 55 jobs. That's $2 million a job. I'll take that job any day of the week. And now they want another $50 billion for the same kinds of things. And you know the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing the same way, expecting different results. I like what Ronald Reagan had to say about all this taxation. He said, "Republicans believe that every day is the 4th of July. Democrats believe every day is April 15th. Might be some truth to that. Now, you Democrats who are here, just forgive me because we're playing with this thing, but listen, that $2 trillion extra dollars in our national debt has left us $12 trillion in debt. It's hard to envision just how much $1 trillion really is. So let me put it in these terms. 1 million seconds ago was 13 days. 1 billion seconds ago was 31 years. 1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years. And 12 trillion seconds ago was 380,256 years ago. Or let me put it another way. $1 million was 5 seconds ago in the U.S. Treasury. $1 billion was late yesterday afternoon in the U.S. Treasury. Now, I've always endeavored to cultivate a biblical worldview. Not to beat people up with it, to endeavor to love people as Jesus did, but to try and see the world, culture, family, friends, and all of that through the eyes of the Scriptures. Because, you know, they're pretty good. I don't know if you've read them. You should. And by that, in terms of tonight's conversation, I would like to see our nation and our culture perhaps the way that God would like to see it. Now, we'll never be there, perfect, but God's values ought to be the goal of our values. And when we fall short of God's values, there's a wonderful thing in the Bible called grace, which I liked what Bill said. I put it in a different way. There's nothing you can do to make God love you more, nothing you can do to make God love you less. But his insights in terms of how our life goes is directly related to how well we follow his insights and his wisdom. And what America is experiencing today is unprecedented in American history because we've never been here before. Now, as you know, 2 years ago, America voted in the most liberal senator in the Senate to the presidency. Since then, we have watched what I call the abomination of America. And while I always respect the office, I do not share Obama's vision or value system for America, because it is clearly not a biblical worldview, which is what I hope to show you tonight. I'll respect the office he holds. I'll acknowledge his great abilities as an orator, as long as there's a teleprompter. And I'll pray for him because the scriptures tell me that I should. May his days be short. That's right out of the scriptures. But frankly, I do not share his beliefs on abortion. I don't share his radical Marxist concept in the redistribution of wealth. I don't share his socialist agenda and entitlement and enslavement of people. I don't share his views on raising taxes for everybody who makes over $150,000, a ceiling which has been changed 3 times since he's taken office. I don't share his view that America is arrogant, and I don't believe that we need to apologize to the world for all that we've given to it and done. In fact, you know what? A thank you from the French would have been nice. And frankly, I'm offended by the removal of the American flag from his plane, his campaign plane, and replacing it with his own symbol. Old Glory replaced with his logo. And I'm equally offended by his failure to salute the flag and repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. What you see on the screen is an authentic photo from Time magazine, September 16, 2007. This is not one of those Photoshop fake things. There's a whole lot of those around. And when his aides were asked about him refusing to put his hand over his heart, his aide said, "It is ridiculous to suggest that Obama was making any kind of statement. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't place his hand over his heart during the national anthem." I don't share his belief that his view on sex offenders. In 1999, he was the only Illinois senator who voted against a bill barring the early release of criminal sex offenders. He was the only one. I don't share his view on pornography. Did you know that Obama voted against filtering pornography in school and library computers? And he voted for sex education for kindergartners? And in 2001, he voted present instead of no on a bill to keep pornographic bookstores, video stores, and strip clubs from setting up business within 1,000 feet of schools and churches. He's refused to vote. I don't share his view that our military should be reduced 25%. The world's more dangerous now than it's ever been. I don't share his view on amnesty for illegals or his view of suing a state that's just simply trying to enforce federal law. I don't share his strategic views in the Middle East. I don't share his views on Islam being our friend and Israel our enemy, or that Israel should give up more land for peace when the Arab world is already 100 times larger. And I certainly don't share his values of sitting down and planning to sit down with terrorist regimes to have discussions about nuclear weapons. I don't share his view on the fact that his claim that America is not a Christian nation. I don't appreciate him selling Ramadan in the White House while ignoring the National Day of Prayer. I don't share his beliefs about the Koran and its influence on the founding of America. There was no Islamic influence in the founding of America. Let me run a video clip and show you in his own words.
We are no longer a Christian nation. We do not consider ourselves a Christian nation. As the Holy Quran tells us, the Holy Quran teaches that, the Holy Quran tells us, and the Holy Quran also says, the United States has been enriched by Muslim Americans. Since our founding, American Muslims have enriched the United States. Islam has always been a part of America's story. There is a mosque in every state in our union, and over 1,200 mosques within our borders. One of the points I want to make is that if you actually took the number of Muslims, Americans, we'd be one of the largest Muslim countries in the world. Let there be no doubt, Islam is a part of America.
Well, the bottom line on all of this is that the biblical worldview of this man is the view of America is vastly different than the biblical worldview and the worldview of the founding fathers. And for those of you who might disagree, although probably not too many of you here, but I'm sure I'll hear about this from the internet, give me 30 minutes or less, and let me walk you through 5 basic biblical issues and compare and contrast them with Mr. Obama. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about a man's view who, if adopted, will turn America into another European state. And so first, let's consider Obama's associates. The biblical worldview is very, very clear about associates. In Amos chapter 3, verse 3, it says, do two people walk together hand in hand if they aren't going to the same place? Now, the principle here is really quite simple. People don't hang out much with people that they don't agree with. I mean, your best friend isn't someone that you fight with over everything. No one spends massive amounts of time with people that constantly argue with them. And your closest friends pretty much share the same worldview as you do. The Bible also says this about our associates. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals. Every parent knows this instinctively, don't you? That's why you don't want your kids hanging out with gangbangers and druggies. This is why what Solomon had in mind when he warned his son about hanging out with people who were given to anger. Solomon wrote, do not associate with a man given to anger or go with a hot-tempered man, or you will learn his ways and find a snare for yourself. Notice it does not say you might learn his ways. It says you will learn his ways. The people we hang with, the closest to us, have tremendous impact upon our values and our emotions and how we see the world. And so what do we know about Obama's associates? Well, we don't know a whole lot about his Islamic connections. That's been scrubbed pretty good, although Omar Gaddafi calls him publicly his black Muslim brother. But we do know about people like Jeremiah Wright, the racist, anti-American pastor. And as you know, Reverend Wright was Obama's pastor for 20 years. Wright is anti-white racist. He's anti-American. Obama has testified that Wright played a pivotal role as his pastor and formed his spiritual foundation. He referred to him as his spiritual mentor, the person who brought him to Jesus. And Obama's book, The Audacity of Hope, came from one of Wright's sermons. Well, just to refresh your memory, let's listen to Reverend Wright in person.
Barack knows what it means to be a black man living in a country and a culture that is controlled by rich white people. Hillary can never know that. Hillary ain't never been called a Hillary is married to Bill, and Bill have been good to us. No, he ain't. Bill did us just like he did Monica Lewinsky. He was riding dirty. The government gives him the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. We bombed Hiroshima. We bombed Nagasaki. And we nuked far more than the thousands in New York and the Pentagon, and we never batted an eye. We have supported state terrorism against the Palestinians and black South Africans, and now we are indignant because the stuff we have done overseas is now brought right back into our own front yard.
Our president listened to that kind of verbal diarrhea for 20 years and never batted an eye. 1 Corinthians 15:33, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals. And did it have an effect on the Obamas? Well, apparently, Michelle Obama said, we are a downright mean country. She said America is a radically, racially oppressive country, an imperialistic nation of white supremacists. And let us not forget that she said she'd never, ever been proud of America until her husband was elected president. And how about other people like Bill Ayers, the unrepentant terrorist? Bill Ayers was a University of Chicago professor of education. He bombed police stations and a long list of other places, resulting in loss of life. He was responsible for the bombing of the United States Capitol, March 1st, 1971. He bombed the Pentagon, May 19th, 1972, claimed it was in retaliation for bombings in Hanoi. Then in January 29, 1975, he bombed the United States Department of State building. He said it was in response to the escalated bombings in Vietnam. Obama has had a close relationship with him for years. Obama kicked off his political career in a fundraiser in Bill Ayers' house. And I know you can't see that picture very well, but it's a picture of Bill Ayers walking on the American flag. Ayers raised the money for Obama to get him elected to the Illinois Senate. And Thomas Sowell, an African-American senior fellow at Stanford University, described Obama and Ayers as, quote, a relationship of alliance. And it was Bill Ayers, you might remember on September 11th, 2001, of all days, that Ayers had an interview with the New York Times, and he told the New York Times on that day, he said, there is an eloquence to bombs. And then reflecting back on the Pentagon bombing, he said, everything was absolutely ideal on that day I bombed the Pentagon. The sky was blue, the birds were singing, and the bastards were finally going to get what they had coming to them. That's a best friend of your president. Don't be deceived. Bad company corrupts good morals. And the real problem here is that after being elected a president, his associations are still extreme. Hopefully you followed the list of czars, that you know who they are. I have 3 pages describing who they are and what they've done. This is absolutely unbelievable. Our AIDS czar is a radical homosexual who of course, believes in gay rights and gay marriage, but wants special status for homosexuals, including complete and free health care for all gays. Our California water czar is a radical environmentalist who has 0 training and experience in water management. He's our czar. Domestic violence czar, a radically vicious anti-male feminist who supports male castration. Our drug czar believes that nobody in America should own a firearm. Our Great Lakes czar has no experience whatsoever in water, but was a member of Acorn's board. And the Green Jobs czar, who has resigned, remember, a member of the Communist Party in San Francisco, who believed that George Bush was the one who flew the planes into the 2 towers. And I could go on with this, but you've heard it, you've read it. And my point here is a biblical worldview says this: if you want to know the character of an individual, look at the people he surrounds himself with. And what about all those flip-flops? That's our second biblical worldview, straight from the words of Jesus. Jesus said, simply, let your yes be yes and your no, no. And anything beyond that comes from the evil one. I like the way the Message puts it. It says, just say yes or no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong. Now, Jesus made that statement to a group of people who played word games. You see, they believed that they could engage in business with folks and they could say or promise anything, and it wasn't binding unless God's name was attached to it. And so they would say anything to close the deal and to get their way. And Jesus confronted them and made it very clear that we are to say what we mean and mean what we say, nothing more, nothing less. And he condemned the manipulation of words to get your own way. He condemned the evil words as coming from the evil one. Now, like most politicians, President Obama is very challenged at this point of yes meaning yes and no meaning no. You might remember that when Hillary campaign was running, she pointed out that Obama had voted present 129 times instead of yes or no while he was a senator. Because whenever there was a politically difficult decision to be made, he sidestepped the difficulty by voting here instead of yes or no. And now, 20 months into the presidency, we see this is a very common thing. When there's a problem, he's paralyzed. Guantanamo Bay, still there. Oil spill, 48 days before he even met with the CEO of the company. The flip-flops are just amazing. And in my research, I found that there are at least 60 unquestionable flip-flops where his yes didn't mean yes and his no didn't mean no. So what would you say about somebody who in this short period of time has 60-plus flip-flops? Do you know that currently there are 2,400 video clips on YouTube demonstrating Obama flip-flops in his own words? He flip-flopped on campaign funding. Remember that? He said, yes, I will accept public funding and play by the rules. And then as soon as he realized that he could get a whole lot more money on the internet and from the Middle East, he flip-flopped on public funding. Obama claimed to be on both sides of the D.C. handgun ban. He said yes and no to welfare reform. One day against it, the next day for it. He shifted his position on nuclear energy. First for it, then against it, now for it, kind of. He shifted his position requiring everyone to purchase health care. First against it, now for it. He shifted his position on Jerusalem. At first saying there would be no division in Jerusalem, and in the very next day saying there would be a divided Jerusalem. He was against coal, now he's for coal. He was not going to get involved in the mosque at Ground Zero because it was a local issue. 3 days later, he celebrates Ramadan in the White House with his Muslim buddies, and now he's for the mosque. It's a flip-flop. For 20 years, Reverend Wright was his pastor, and he loved him. And then when Reverend Wright became a problem, he threw him under the bus. Well, I won't bother you with any more of the flip-flops, but let me just, in his own words, show you a few of them.
Iran, Cuba, Venezuela, these countries are tiny compared to the Soviet Union. They don't pose a serious threat to us. So let me be absolutely clear. Iran is a grave threat. We can send 15,000 more troops, 20,000 more troops, 30,000 more troops. I don't know any expert on the region or any military officer that I've spoken to privately that believes that that is going to make a substantial difference on the situation on the ground. Now, I had no doubt, and I said at the time when I opposed the surge, that given how wonderfully our troops perform, if we place 30,000 more troops in there, then we would see an improvement in the security situation and we would see a reduction in the violence. So if somebody wants to build a coal-fired plant, they can. It's just that it will bankrupt them because they're going to be charged a huge sum for all that greenhouse gas that's being emitted.
In Illinois and the U.S. Senate, Barack Obama helped lead the fight for clean coal to protect our environment and save good-paying American jobs.
Last year, you said if you were the nominee, you would opt for public financing in the general election of a campaign. You checked yes on a questionnaire.
We've made the decision not to participate in the public financing system for the general election.
You said in Idaho recently, quoting here, I have no intention of taking away folks' guns. But you support the D.C. handgun ban, and you said that it's constitutional. How can you reconcile those two positions?
I have said consistently that I believe the Second Amendment is an individual right, and that was the essential decision that the Supreme Court came down on. I am not a nuclear energy proponent. I favor nuclear power as one component of our overall energy mix. Jerusalem will remain the capital of Israel, and it must remain undivided. But I've also said that that's a final status issue. That's an issue that has to be dealt with the parties involved, the Palestinians and the Israelis. I can no more disown him than I can disown the black community. I am outraged by the comments that were made and saddened over the spectacle.
Well, flip-flops, when Jesus says, let your yes be yes, your no be no. Associates, the Bible's very clear. You can know the values of an individual by those he surrounds himself with. There's a third issue, and that issue is socialism. The president's perspective on socialism is far from a worldview, or biblical worldview. And I doubt that there's much question here tonight that Obama has a socialist agenda. His government seizure of the banking system, the auto industry, how to make it obvious, grabbing the healthcare industry. And I don't know if you've noticed, but your rates have probably already gone up anywhere between 5 and 30%. And they haven't seen anything yet with cap and trade coming. That energy tax will wipe out the middle class. But this man's agenda seems to be to, as he states, level the playing field, mean the redistribution of wealth, socialism. And this is obvious also from the fact that he was a member of the New Party. Now, most people don't realize that Obama was a member of the New Party. The New Party was a political party established by democratic socialists in America. Their goal was to push forth socialist principles by focusing upon small, winnable elections. Their web pages today have been thoroughly scrubbed, but an archived web page was overlooked. And a paragraph from their own newsletter celebrated the victory of 3 members of the New Party, a socialist party. And here's a quote. 3 New Party members won Democratic primaries last spring and face off against Republican opponents in the election next year. Danny Davis, U.S. House, Barack Obama, State Senate, Patricia Martin, Cook County Judiciary. New Party member Barack Obama was uncontested for his state Senate seat in Chicago. Now, there's no way in the world that you would be a member of the new party if you're not a socialist. But let me give you a snapshot of what the Bible says about socialism, because you don't hear a lot about that in pulpits. First of all, a socialist state tends to lean toward heavy taxation and borrowing due to its insatiable spendthrift nature in its desire to buy voters who will keep it in power. Ultimately, this results in the enslavement of an entire nation. And through heavy taxation, socialism becomes a form of public slavery where people are required to act as slave labor force for some grand federal plantation. More importantly, though, socialism is rooted in covetousness. And the root problem with socialism is that it is rooted in economic envy. You hear it from the left consistently. Let the rich pay their fair share. They already pay it, folks. The top 10% pay 64.89% of all the nation's taxes. The top 25% pay 82.9%. The top 50% pay 96.3%. And the bottom 50% pay 3.9% of all of the income taxes. The top 1% are paying 10 times the amount of the bottom 50%. And that bottom 50% is the one that typically has their hands out, pay me and I'll keep voting for you. But this isn't just about the rich. It's about taxes out of control that destroy a nation. It's like the little boy. He wrote a letter because his dad had lost his job. And he wrote a letter to God. He said, "Dear God, Daddy lost his job and we sure need some help. Please send $100. And he addressed the letter to God. The letter ended up in Washington, D.C. A clerk felt sorry for the little kid and mailed him back $5. A few days later, another letter came from the same little boy. "Dear God, we sure do thank you for the $100 gift. But why did you send it through Washington? By the time they took their cut, there was only $5 left." That little guy's got it figured out. You think about it. Your income taxes, federal, your state income taxes, every gallon of gasoline you buy, there's a tax. There's a tax on sales tax. There's a tax on tax. If you change your mind, there's a tax. I like the way Ronald Reagan summed up this socialism. He said the government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. But it's all rooted, men and women, in class warfare that is raged between the right and the left, rooted in covetousness, which violates the 10th commandment. Take a look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Note that the comment forbids coveting anything that is your neighbor's. That's what leveling the playfield is all about. This verse alone rules out socialist justification that the rich don't need to keep their money, it needs to be redistributed. But more importantly, in terms of our conversation tonight, one of the biblical qualifications for being a leader in the Scriptures is to hate covetousness. Take a look at Exodus chapter 18, verse 21. Furthermore, you shall select out of all the people able men who, 1, fear God, 2, men of truth, 3, those who hate covetousness. And you shall place them as your leaders. That verse disqualifies from office, biblically, anyone with socialist leanings. Why? Because socialist leanings and politics are rooted in coveting what others have. Basically, biblically, the role of the government is very simple. In all the social rules and regulations of the Hebrew Bible, there's not a hint of socialism. Further, in the New Testament, government had one role, and that was public safety and protection from evil people. That's what Romans chapter 13, verse 3 and 4 clearly states. This is all the government should do. For the authorities do not frighten people who are doing right, but they frighten those who do wrong. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid. It does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath upon the one who practices evil. And so, what is the state's duty? Is it to rob from the rich and give to the poor? Is it to redistribute wealth? Is it to cripple the national economy? No, it's to just bring justice to those who practice evil so that everyone in the land is free as the founders intended it, free to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And finally, there's one other scripture that's very clear about this whole socialist entitlement, work ethic, 2 Thessalonians 3. Don't you remember the rule that we had when we lived with you? If you don't work, you don't eat. And now we're getting reports that a bunch of lazy, good-for-nothings are taking advantage of you. This must not be tolerated. We command them to get back to work immediately. No excuses, no arguments, and to earn their own keep. Friends, don't slack off in doing your duty. That's God's call for us. Well, what if someone's hurt and can't work? Charity. That's the obligation of us, to give and to help and to support people. And so we've seen that President Obama fails on these three fronts, and there's a fourth that is very disturbing, and that is his position on abortion. I have 4 pages in my files of pro-abortion official acts conducted by President Obama in the last 22 months. His support for abortion is unquestionable, but most people don't realize how radical his views are. In 2001, he voted present on a bill to notify parents that their minor was seeking an abortion. He couldn't say yes or no, he just said present. Twice he voted against bills prohibiting tax-funded abortions. And so while he claims the health bill won't pay for government-funded abortions, that's not reflected in his voting record, nor is it reflected in the final bill. But he's far more radical than that. Let me show you what I mean by taking you to the Hebrew Bible. One of the most appalling acts ever committed by Israel was the destruction of their children. In Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 5, it says that God was outraged by their activities, and it even says that he didn't even think to prohibit this because this never even came to mind. It says in Psalm 106, they sacrificed their sons and daughters. They slit the throats of their babies. They murdered their infant girls. They offered their babies to Canaanite gods. The blood of their babies stained the land. Their way of life stank to high heaven. They lived like horrors. And God was furious, a wildfire of anger. He could not stand to even look at his people. And you know, culturally what had happened is that the Baal worshipers had better crops than the Israelites. So the Israelites said, what's the difference? They said, we worship Baal. If you worship Baal, your crops will improve too. They claimed that it was a blessing. So these people were willing to kill their children because their children were an economic liability. And God said in Jeremiah 19, I never even thought to forbid this. And then in Psalm 106, he says he is absolutely appalled. And if those verses don't sound outrageous enough, let me remind you something. While Obama was a state senator, he defended infanticide. He defended the killing of fully born infants that survived a botched abortion attempt. And it was registered nurse Jan Stanek who blew the whistle on what was called induced labor abortion. This procedure, an abortionist injects solution into the birth canal. It induces a premature labor. The baby is born alive, wrapped in soiled linens, and left to die. The baby is issued a birth certificate and a death certificate on the very same day. This outraged people. And so the Senate introduced a bill called the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, a bill which Obama refused to support. So let me ask you, how about his refusal to even support the Born Alive Infant Protection Act? At a federal level, the laws passed in the Senate 98-0, banning the murder of infants. But on the state level, Obama defended infanticide, voting against this bill not once, but 3 times. And having the audacity to claim that he would have voted for the bill if the language had been identical to the federal. That's just rhetoric too, because he was the chairman of the committee that produced the bill. He could have chosen any wording that he liked. And the truth is he derailed that bill in committee until finally he left the committee, and then it was offered and he voted against it 3 times. Make no mistake about it, Obama's view on abortion is more liberal than any individual in Congress. That is not a biblical worldview. And then finally, how about Obama on Israel? You all know the biblical principle quite well from Genesis chapter 12, verse 2 and 3. I will make you a great nation and bless you. I will make you famous. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those I will curse. The biblical principle here is undeniable. The national blessing of any nation rests upon how good or evil it is to the nation of Israel. And those who are evil to Israel suffer a divine curse. And what really concerns me in this is his obvious favoritism of Arab nations. It ought to be clear to anyone who follows the news that Obama has very little tolerance for Israel. He has publicly mocked the Hebrew Bible while quoting extensively the Holy Quran, he calls it. During the past 16 months, he focused his energies entirely upon the Arab world. His very first television interview after the election was with Arabic Cable Television Network. In June, when he visited Egypt, shortly after the elections, he visited Saudi Arabia, and he shunned Israel. Time before last, when Israel's president visited the White House, Obama refused to even have dinner with them. He was the first president in history to bow before the king of Saudi Arabia. But he won't even visit Israel. I wonder why he didn't bow to the Queen of England. To be consistent, instead, he gave the Queen an iPod with his own speeches on it. I'm really restraining myself from very sarcastic statements here. One of his first international speeches was given in Egypt. It was addressed to the Muslim world. And when it came to the issue of Israel and Palestine conflict, he said, quote, "Nobody has suffered more than the Palestinian people." Really? I vaguely remember something about 6 million Jews. He totally ignores the fact that Israel has been terrorized for years, surrounded by enemies who have launched war after war after war against them. He sides with the Palestinians, and bless their hearts, you know how the Palestinian problem arose, don't you? It's phenomenal. Before the Six-Day War, the Arab nations flooded the airways, encouraging the Arabs living in peace in Israel to come to the borders and fight with us. We will kill the Israelis, and you can return to your home and own your neighbor's, Jewish neighbor's home too. And by the tens of thousands, they went to the borders. 6 days later, the war was over. The Arab nations had been defeated. And all those Arabs that had gone to the borders to fight wanted to come home. Israel said, "I don't think so. What would you say?" And so they were stuck on the border, and Israel said, "Your Arab brothers need to take you." The Arabs refused and set up camps. And the only people who took goods and supplies to keep those people alive were the Israelis. And now there's a Palestinian problem, and it focuses from the media world on the fact that it's all Israel's problem because Israel's taken their land. That's not at all the case. Israel gave them the Gaza Strip just to try and buy peace. Obama believes that Israel needs to give up land to get peace. He said, quote, "Israel government must make difficult concessions for the peace process to restart." Men and women, this has never worked in the past, and it won't work in the future, and I'll tell you why. Because the underlying agenda of the Arab world is that Israel has no right to exist. And as long as they believe that, no amount of land is ever going to buy peace. And at every turn, Obama scolds and ignores Israel while passionately reaching out to the Islamic world. And I'll tell you this, his anti-Israel persuasion invites a divine curse upon our land. Perhaps, just perhaps, the economic situation that we're looking at today that is impossible might very well be that curse. French historian once asked American diplomat James Russell Lowell, "How long will the American Republic endure?" And this Harvard Law School educated Lowell, over 100 years ago, answered, "As long as the ideas of the men who founded it continue dominant." And I've got to tell you, those ideas are no longer dominant. America is falling to a silent revolution, one that began when we gave up the classrooms, one that continued with the appointment of judges educated in those classrooms. You men and women are today living in a judicial tyranny. This is not a land by the people, for the people, of the people. If you think not, Californians can vote overwhelmingly for a law protecting marriage, and one judge overturned it all. We're living in a land that is fueled by covetousness, entitled voters with their hands out, and good people. It is time to act. Edmund Burke said, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Good people, get to work. Save this great nation. And so, Father, we bow before you this evening, and we bring before you our land. You've told us that if we would humble ourselves and pray, that you would restore the land. And I'm certain that everyone in this room has prayed for that. Now, may we continue to pray, but may we graciously and boldly start to talk about these things. Make sure that we engage in the public discussion, to not just sit back and watch the greatest land in the history of the world that has blessed this world beyond belief, not allow it to die, because America is too young to die. And so save and restore our land and give us wisdom to know when and where to act. And we pray this in Jesus'